Now I'm like really, really eager to get into your story and how you got into this line of work, because you don't fall into it by accident, at least not to the degree of, impact that you're making. So I would love to sort of get into that piece. And, I just encourage you to share whatever you're comfortable with and start at any point you'd like. But this is what this podcast is about, is kind of getting down to those moments where you're like a flip switched and you're like, it had to be me that took on this lift, Yeah. So I'm going to let you just take it away from here, and then we'll kind of reflect back on your experiences and go from there.
Well, mine wasn't a light switch moment. Mine was hidden and buried for 2 decades and ignored and never brought up and never mentioned and never revisited ever. Like, dark,
Wow.
Bury it, hide it, don't ever discuss it, pretend it, just make it disappear from your life, right? So that's why it's interesting where I'm at. It had to be me, and things just, God allowed things to happen to me for a reason that I didn't understand. It made me go through struggles and certain things that just recently I'm talking about publicly. I never thought I would ever talk about, but I think it's important because it encourages other people to know that they're not alone.
Yep.
And their story isn't just theirs, and that we have to prevent it from happening to others, right?
Mm-hmm.
And my story is very, very, very minor compared to the stories that I know are out there. Like, I wouldn't even talk about it. Partially, that's probably why I didn't, is because I was like, well, mine's nothing compared to this. And I was comparing my story to others.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't matter. It was my story. And so it did affect me. And I've even had people who I shared with was like, that's your story, dude? And I was like, yeah, see? And I validated it. My belief was that, well, it's not as bad as that. So, but I'll tell you, I was sexually abused right after I turned 12 years old, at a sleepover at my friend's house, right? And so, but you asked me earlier, like, when did you know that it was wrong? In that moment, in that second. Like, it didn't take time for me to figure out, like, there's something wrong. This is wrong. And you feel it, and you try to stop it, but you can't, and you're helpless. And the thing that drives me probably throughout my whole life, and now especially what I do, is it was so unfair. It wasn't fair, right? Like, I was helpless. And so burying that, and literally burying it to the point where I kind of never really fully forgot it, but it wasn't a part of my life anymore, right? Even though it was very clearly in my relationships and certain things, it was still showing up. It was there, but it wasn't. And so how did I get into this? I'm going to sidetrack a second.
Yeah.
But I ended up going into the film business, and I traveled the world working in some of the biggest movies and television on the planet. And I got very close to one of these people who has been extraordinarily influential in my life, Jim Caviezel, who played a guy in this movie called The Sound of Freedom.
Mm-hmm.
But I worked with him very closely and traveled the world for 10 years with him. Actually, I was on the phone when I showed up for this podcast with him. He's one of my closest friends. He's taught me a lot, and he's been an insane mentor in my life. And so, he plays this movie, and I'd never said no to a movie in my life at this point. But I was changing my life. I was now focusing on my family. I was 40 years old, and I was like, God, it's time for me to grow up. I just got married 2 months ago, and I told her, I was like, I'm not going to be married to my work anymore. I'm going to be married to you. We're going to start a family. It's great. And Jim calls me up. Hey, I'm doing this movie of this real superhero. Come with me. And I was like, ooh, trying to tell my new wife of 2 months, hey, and she'd already known. We've been together for years before this, but I was like, hey, doesn't this sound cool?
Mm-hmm.
Trying to sell her on it. And then we were like, okay, yeah, it sounds good. I was going to go. I was actually getting ready to go. And then we found out there was the Zika virus down in Colombia, and we wanted to have kids. And I was like, well, I'm not going to jeopardize that. So even though my personal desire was like, yes, I'm going, it was the first movie I ever said no to in 20 years. Right? And as I still work, talk with Jim, and he'd send me videos and stuff, I was like, wow. My wife and I started following this organization, and it was like, wow, this is insane. Like, this is crazy. Little did I know, I was working for a different, at this time, doing videos and production for another company that had several million followers. I was the face of this company. And so this other organization was like, hey, come on down. We're going to have fun. You can meet everybody and, do some videos, promote what we're doing, and blah, blah, blah. I was like, this is cool. I go down there. Oh, my goodness. It's like, at that time, this was years ago. I was like, wow, these people are incredible. There's only like 20 some people working for this organization. They were amazing. And I was so drawn to this. I didn't know exactly why, but I was so drawn to it, because I'd buried everything in my life, including the fact that, I'd been taken at gunpoint and kidnapped. And that was a whole nother story later in my life, that my freedom was taken from me. And I talk about unfair. I had this crazy feel like I need to go work for this organization. And I ended up going and working for that organization. Spent many years traveling the world. And it wasn't until like I had this crazy experience and I was like, oh my gosh, no, why am I so passionate about this?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I didn't even identify it at the time. Like, why am I so passionate about this? I'm like, oh my gosh, I can totally relate.
Mm-hmm.
Deep down inside of me, I'm that child, right?
Yep.
That's me. That's why I'm fighting for these children that I never thought I would be in this position, but now I'm sitting here like fighting for these children, like overly obsessed with probably jeopardizing my relationships and my home life and all that stuff because I'm so committed to this. It was so deep inside of me. And so now, and again, we talked about the rebranding, like it is the innocent, it's those innocent people. I know what that's like. Like in a second, your life changes forever.
Yep.
Right. My innocence. And what does that do? It drives you down a different path. Like, trust me, the choices I started making in life were not good.
Yep.
Right. I started making for years.
Yeah.
Fought with different decisions, made terrible decisions. You talk about praying to God to forgive you for things that you've done. I mean, goodness gracious.
Been there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I literally have the word forgiven tattooed on my body because of the things I've done. I know I need to be forgiven, and I have. And I still, even this last weekend, begging for forgiveness. Like, forgive me. And knowing that I'm still good, and I'm good, and I've been forgiven, but that night changed me.
Mm-hmm.
Right? My light was infiltrated by dark.
Mm-hmm.
And without knowing the difference between light and dark, I just continued to operate in darkness.
Yeah.
Sucks.
This is a great segue into what I'm about to talk about next, or what I'd like to get into. So when we're young and innocent, our discernment is very much under construction, right? And we might know in our gut that something's wrong, but we are not fully integrated in our being to be able to trust that intuition. So in that moment, you felt like you knew that was wrong, but I think there's a lot of disconnect between when what we feel in that moment, and then when we learn to trust that feeling, and we will bury things and deny ourselves and maybe seek out vices, right, to disassociate. It's like a coping mechanism, right? And we're so young, like, we feel these things, but we don't truly know good versus bad because we've started with this clean slate. We're innocent, right? Mm-hmm. So do you remember the moment when you felt like you were fully integrated and you started to like trust that feeling, like, okay, yes, that I knew that was wrong, but now I actually believe it was wrong, and you stopped denying yourself?
I don't think there was a moment where I just stopped. Like, I think I still deal with that. Like, I still get those moments of like, what is that? And it goes back to the unfair. Usually it's because something's not fair. Like, oh, that's not fair. And it lights me up and I start boiling and my blood starts boiling. I'm like, what's that feeling? That's not right. Wait, that's not who I am. That's not aligned with my character. What's going on? Like, I feel that that's not right. Whether it's not even my story that's happened directly to me, but a story, right? So identifying a moment though where I may have felt like it wasn't right. I don't know. I'd have to think about this one.
We can circle back to it for sure. I guess we could pivot into like the forgiveness aspect, because part of, I guess, working through what you had to work through is you had to forgive somebody, right? And I know for me, forgiveness is a really difficult thing because I always apply this like moral filter over a person when I'm considering forgiveness. And I think there's two types of people. Some people, maybe they make a poor choice or a judgment call, but really they're only hurting themselves. And then there's other people that make poor choices and they have complete disregard for
Yeah.
anybody else but themselves, right? And I think that stripping a child of their innocence is a great example of the latter. And I know for me, in my experience, my dad was an alcoholic, but his dad, in my mind, was the one that stripped him of his innocence. I don't even blame my dad as much because his dad left him when he was 11, and he didn't have the opportunity to be a child, and he didn't have a role model. And I realized, like, okay, is that the person I need to forgive? Is it his dad? And I'm like, there's no way. I cannot forgive this guy. He left my grandma with 9 kids. How can I do that? And then I realized forgiveness is more for you than it is the other person anyway. And I need to forgive myself for creating space for somebody that has no regard for anybody but themselves. So I realized, like, I actually don't need to forgive anybody but myself. And what is your opinion on forgiveness? Have you been able to forgive the person that hurt you and brought darkness into your light?
Well, I think since there's so many places in my life that I need to forgive in, not only forgive myself, but I think some of them are easier than others. I would say that at my age, just after I turned 12, that one was hard for a while, but looking back, it's super easy because it goes back to the story of a child who's probably been molesting a sibling's friend, so did that person even know any better?
Mm-hmm.
Probably not.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't really their fault. It's because somebody did it to them.
How old was this person?
I think probably like 15,
Okay.
16, 15, 16,
Yeah.
somewhere around there.
But still pretty young. So do you feel like you can have empathy for them?
Oh, I pray for them, man. Are
Yep.
you kidding? It's like, what are they struggling with? What
Mhm.
caused it on them? Like,
Yep.
where does this come from at such a young age, and to have no empathy for another human's life to understand that there's something wrong?
Yeah,
Right?
like their light had already been infiltrated by darkness. And back to the whole idea that, like, our discernment between good, bad, right, and wrong is still very much under construction. And who knows what happened to that person, right?
Yeah.
They might not know the difference, right, at all.
Yeah, that's
because
right.
of how much darkness has infiltrated their light. So
And that's kind of what that case was. And in the other case where I was taken at gunpoint and kidnapped and whole crazy another story, that one was really tough. And there's certain things that I think I have forgiven them for it. I was asked very recent after that, do you forgive them? And I laughed out loud. Like, come on, that's completely absurd. You would even ask the question. Have I forgiven them? Like, hell no, I didn't forgive them. Why? How could you forgive these people for what they did? Obviously, I was very young and immature at the time and didn't even understand forgiveness, right? But then it slowly creeped in. I remember, so one of them got sentenced to life in prison. And I remember on Christmases, I'd be like, dang, I wonder what. I ended up having to face several of them in court, and I saw their parents, and their parents were crying and begging me to, this and that,
for mercy, yeah.
whatever. And I saw the siblings of this person, and I remember going like, oh my gosh, it's Christmas. And that guy's family is missing someone at their Christmas. And I was like, why am I feeling like that? I shouldn't feel like that. Screw these mothers,
Yeah.
Like, and there's definitely, even in that event, there's ones that I can forgive easier than others in that event.
Because maybe they were more guilty by association.
No, they were just straight up hardcore. There was drivers in the driver's seat, and there was passengers in the passenger seat. You know what I mean? And there's like relentless people who owned it. Like one of them owned it.
So it was the ownership they took that made it easier for you to forgive.
Yeah, they were like, oh my gosh. And the other one was like, not owning anything. None of it. And I'm like, screw you, because you're even harder. Anyways. And then there's pieces in my life where I still struggle with forgiveness. Trust me, and I don't want to.
Mm-hmm.
But because I was abused as a child for so many years, not in a sexual abuse, but a physically massive, violent, physical child abuse for most of my childhood, like, whew, that one's tough.
Yeah.
And I feel like I can say, like, of course I have. I love that person. But does it still cut? Probably what fuels my unfairness.
Yeah.
Like, it's attached to me so strongly that I revisit it, and man, that goes into a whole other thing. Like, how do I handle that and deal with that? This has been a crazy journey for me even to understand, because I thought I was good.
Yeah.
I was cruising through life, doing my thing, and then all this trauma comes back into my life, and it reopens up massive amounts of trauma that I've experienced. And then who has to be the side effect of that? It's the people closest to me that live in my own home.
Yeah.
Right? I don't know what the hell's going on, and neither do they. What's going on? But it's triggering things I thought were buried deep that weren't ever going to arise to the surface again, right?
Yeah.
And so now just being aware, and some of them could be minor things, but I can now identify as like, is somebody being treated unfair in this situation? Is that why I'm so fired up right now?
Yeah.
You know, because one, I hate bullies. I've always been a bully killer. I hate them. It's got me into a lot of trouble because I would go run and dive straight into a fight or whatever it was and go for the person who was being kind of overtaken by the bully. Or sometimes I'd get there before it even got to that point. But I've always, probably because of the way I was as a child, you know.
Yeah.
So dealing with forgiveness is a huge part of it, and I think that it's different for every scenario in your life.
Yeah.
Individual.
Yeah, and healing is not linear. And I had a similar situation where I thought I was good, processed the death of my dad, all the things, and then just a month ago, I'm at my aunt's funeral, and it was almost the same manner of death, same church, same people, right? And I walked into the church, and I literally, like, uncontrollably was shaking. I mean, I've never had a panic attack, but I think that's what was happening. And so that's the crazy thing about healing is, you know, I was going to ask you, when you had kids, did that bubble up a lot for you for the abuse that you went through? Because you're looking at your children being like, I could never, you know?
Yeah. I mean, on a minor level, it's hard for me to watch my kids fight, you know, because I'm like, whoa, you know, because that was like my life growing up. And so I think the part that, there's a quote on our website that came from my son, my oldest son. And I remember watching him. This is a crazy true story. We're walking down just a common store that everybody goes into, and he's just looking because he's never been in the store before, and I've been in it 100 times. He's like, wow. And he's just looking up, whoa, Dad, look at that. And I was like, and some other person noticed it and was like, isn't that sense of wonder amazing? And I was like, it is. And I was like, wow, it is a sense of wonder. But it's also innocence, you know, like this, wow. And then that's why they're on the quote on our website is a child's wonder a child's innocence is a wonder of the world. Let's preserve it, right? Like we want to preserve like the Grand Canyon. We want to preserve the coral reefs. But that sense of wonder is such a precious thing. Like we need to preserve that. Why are we not dumping billions of dollars into preserving that sense of wonder and innocence? Because it gets carved away by certain events in life. And so not only did that happen with my children, but my deep-rooted one, when I saw these children who were being sacrificed, some of them the same age as my children, I was like, well, a different connection with children. How could I feel like I was designed to protect them. How could people do this to them? And that actually was the night that I crossed a line that I never crossed before. And that was like, when we talk about eliminating the threat, I was fully there. Like, those humans who are doing that to children don't deserve to continue to live, right? Like, that's why I did cross that line, and I had to deal with that too, you know. And I'm sorry, I totally am getting distracted.
No, this is
on
perfect.
Some of these
Keep
things.
going.
But my children, they're so fragile, not just physically but emotionally, and they're trying to learn the things of the world, and it gave me a real sense of how much they need us.
Yeah, more than ever.
Oh, these children need us. And earlier you said something about like, well, how can I protect my children if I have children? You know, there's only so much I can do. Well, actually, what's interesting is people always ask, what can I do? What can I do? No, you can help protect your children. You know, like not only at home and on the phone and all this stuff, but like it's up to us, the people right now, to really fund our police to get the training and equipment they need to go proactively hunt these predators. It's up to us. We can do something about it, because if we aren't out there creating risk, and that's part of it. I think you asked a question earlier as well, like, well, how do they keep progressing to these things? There's no freaking risk. In this small town I told you about, they had 7 drug task force officers and 0 child crimes officers. There's 0 risk.
Whoa.
Which is why it's so important that we do something about it. Not only is it us, the people who talk and demand change, and the more we talk about it, the more we expect people to start doing something and demand them to start doing something, we have to just take it into our own hands. And that's where I showed up. I was like, done. We're done. We're not going to hope somebody's going to pass a law and funding gets accepted so that we get more funding. Screw it. There's too many dang people out here in the United States who are wanting to protect the children of the United States. Let's go.
Yep.
So let's us start a fundraiser like your friend who introduced us. He said, let's put a stop to this. Let's equip our law enforcement with the tools and the training that they need to go out and hunt these guys so that our communities are safe.
Yeah.
Let's go.
Yeah.
And that's what's happening. And it's starting to trickle. I was on the phone with a group out of Chicago in Florida today before this. Like, they want to fund their police to get the training and equipment they need so they can go protect their communities.
Yep.
Let's
and
go.
There's a continuum here. Like, let's just imagine every single person, every single parent we knew just stop posting pictures of their kids. Like, that would remove so much of the inventory that these people are drawing from and selling, right? Yeah. And so it's crazy because you're right. We can do little things. It's just being like more aware of like those little micro activities that fuel this bigger problem, you know? And so, like, I know for me, I'm going to be a lot more aware about posting about my niece, you know, when I'm with her. I mean, now I'm like, I don't even want to post about her at all, you know?
We don't, none of our kids are on any, I don't really do social media, but my wife and I, that's one rule. We don't have any photos. Nobody knows what our children even look like. Well, especially us being targets, right? Like, if somebody's going to go after someone's kid, it's probably going to most likely be somebody who's trying to be the face of like, let's go and attack these predators. Yep. You know, I understand that. I'm full on, bring it on. Like, let's go. I know it's going to happen. It's going to come. So protecting my kids is part of it too. Is like, no one knows where they go to school. Nobody knows where they live. Nobody knows what they look like. Nobody knows their names. You know, and I'm going to go to the fullest extent of protecting that. And someday they probably will. Yeah. And it is what it is. But social media has changed so much psychology of the world where they're getting validation through social media. And I understand the photo album part of like preserving your photos, but there's apps out there that can do that too, and sharing those moments. But one, just make your profile public or private, not public. I think that's it. Doesn't make you bulletproof, but it slows it down a little bit, right? Even with girls, like they think that like, I'll just post it on my story because it disappears in 24 hours, or I'll just do it on Snapchat. It never goes away. It doesn't. Like, even somebody who like posts it can screenshot it, take those photos. You know, here's one piece of advice I'll give to parents: if you are going to post pictures of your children, take a picture of your child and then screenshot it and upload the screenshot. Don't just actually post the photo with all the information attached to it.
That's okay.
Right. And so you're not actually posting all the key identifiers that whoever needs to find it finds it. Yep. Right. It's just a screenshot.
That's a good call out. Yeah. I didn't think about that. Okay. Good call.
I still wouldn't do it.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, just because it's a face, right?
Right. But why? Like, why do you need to put your children's faces out there for everyone to see? Maybe if they're winning an award or doing something, I post it on a story, it disappears, but it doesn't stay on your timeline. But, you know, like bikinis of 11-year-olds.
Well, when you talk about pros and cons, it's negligible. Like, what would happen if you didn't post about your kids? What would happen if you just told your friends about them? Because those are the people paying attention to it anyway.
Yeah, text them to your 10 closest people.
Like, the reality is that if you had the engagement functions turned on your social media, very few people, we are so short-sighted. Like, our attention span is so thin. I literally scroll through all those things. Obviously. So what's the point? Right. Just so you can show the facade, that like the highlight reel, like, oh, I live this perfect life. Right. Like, it's all fake anyway. We all have issues.
Right. Seriously. And when you look at like on your story, when you see how many people viewed it, how many people liked it, it's like extremely minimal for the most part, right? So like they're just scrolling past it anyways, since no one cares. Yeah. Right. Unless it's about them. Yeah, for the most part. But that's the other thing with our purpose-driven media is what we call it, is that we want to educate through that media, right? Like we don't want to just post about like things. We don't want it to be dark. You'll see it. Again, we're rebranding, so everything's starting fresh and new. But I think it's important to engage with people through education. Mm-hmm. So here's the cool thing. Yeah, I want to create education for parents, which people are like, how do we educate the parents? Well, that's great and all, but they're not being preyed upon. How do we educate kids? Right. And not only that, we have another program that we're starting, and parents, and like I said earlier, parents and kids around this conversation are very difficult to have, you know, sometimes even teachers, but through school resource officers who are already law enforcement, who are in schools, if we can develop a program that we can train school resource officers to ring people's doors. When I was a kid in school, it was a DARE, drug
DARE,
resistance education, abuse resistance education, right? And they actually, police officers would come to the school and they would teach about the scary stuff about drugs out there. Some people would probably spark their curiosity, but others maybe scare the hell out of them, right? When are we going to start doing that? Because this is the fastest growing criminal enterprise, right? You're talking about a demand from people who just love sex and want to view it, and there's no restrictions, total access to it, which is way easier than buying drugs or firearms, and it's very lucrative too. A child who is owned by a trafficker can make $250,000 a year off of that, and they don't have to invest much or any to get them. Right. Mm-hmm. Whereas drugs, if you want to make $250,000 a year, you take a ton of risk by purchasing and selling and this and that, and reinvesting and reinvesting and reinvesting and reinvesting. And it's just so lucrative. So this is a problem that we need to face, and we gotta quit ignoring it or calling it a conspiracy, because we have facts and evidence, we just do.
Yeah. Well, so it's funny. I was going to get into the ignorance is bliss muscle that a lot of us get to exercise still, because in this line of work, it's all consuming, it's traumatizing, and most of us have the luxury and the fortune of still being able to exercise the ignorance is bliss muscle. But with everything that you've seen, like, you can't be ignorant to anything, not in your line of work, you know what I mean? And so the next question I have is can you identify some moments, or has there ever been a time where you're like, you know what, I need to throw the towel in, abandon this ship, it's too hard for me and my family? Have you ever had any moments like that, and how have you powered through them?
I can't even count how many times.
Mm-hmm.
Ask myself, is it worth it? Even my wife. But you get through it. I don't know how. People ask me this. Actually, you mentioned it. People say this to me all the time. They're like, how are you so positive working in the darkness that you work in? I don't have an answer. Right? I mean, I will say that years of amazing therapy has given me tools that helps. My personal thing is I'm a devoted Christian personally in my personal life, right?
Yep.
Every morning I have my routines, I have my protection that I build around me, and I have my grounding, I have my compass that drives me forward, and also that I put out my day and this and stuff. And so I believe there's a shield around me. Now, don't get me wrong. There's moments, I mean, I get attacked all the time. And there are ones that hurt way worse and last a lot longer. My wife will identify that as like, hey, you're in that funk, goes back to risk reward. Like, the risk of that versus the reward is a no-brainer for me.
Yep.
I'm pretty strong mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, and I'm getting stronger all the time. I practice that every day, all those things. It's part of my life, my routine. And I can only say that there's some sort of grace that I've been given to really get through it and handle it. Look, it is not easy. Let me tell you, one of our missions, one of our components of what we provide is mental health therapy for our officers that are doing this. For any officer actually in the department that has to focus on child crimes, because the turnover rate is like 2 or 3 years. It's horrific. It's, I think, the most grotesque, hardest things. It's your brain scientifically. This comes from psychology.
Yeah.
Your brain's always trying to figure things out, make things make sense, and connect the dots. Where we struggle, and I would say me and my teams and other people in this line of work, is it never connects, and the dots never connect. It doesn't ever make sense.
You'll never understand.
So you're going to struggle with that, trying to make sense, because your brain can't ever, for the most part, if you're a healthy human being, can't put together why a 41-year-old would show up to have sex with an 11-year-old and be brutal and rape them. So you're never going to figure that out. Like, there's just things that you can't deal with. And so the tools part is amazing, though. And I got to give some serious props to not only the women that I work with, but also the women that helped me through this and gave me some really cool tools. And one, I can't relate my life story to somebody else's life story, right? They're two different things. But if I compare them, boy, I can go down to a lot of different emotions. So that's one place that helps me, is separating my life, because the unfairness is so prevalent in my life. Because I would be in a pool of unfairness. It's so unfair.
Yeah.
That child's life, and I go to sadness. Anger, if it's not dealt with, turns to sadness, and I would get sad. and I would get depressed, sad, and like wear it, right? And then
Mm-hmm.
whatever all other packages that comes along with that, I would carry. And one of the most valuable things I ever got was, and that's probably just part of it is me, but I'm a very empathetic, carry sympathy for other people, put myself in their shoes, feel what they feel type of person. And so when I was in these situations or these stories or whatever was happening, for some reason, I don't know why my brain does this, I put myself in their shoes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I've even done exercise growing up, was like literally putting myself in other people's shoes and being uncomfortable, blah, blah, blah. But I would live in it. Like I would just float in their pain and suffering, right? Why?
Yep.
I don't know why. I just did. And then there was a point where I got an amazing tool that was like, hey, there's a time and a place and there's an amount of time that you need to be stuck in that. Try when you go into that, be like, I'm going to allow it and I'm going to create this place for it, but it's only going to be for 3 to 5 minutes. And then set a timer and then be done with it and move on. Because to live in it for 3 days is unhealthy.
Yes.
Right? And so, or for weeks, or just 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. It's unhealthy. You can't sustain that.
No.
Right? So I remember the first time that I put this into play, and I was in this island where we were at this home with 120 some kids, and they're all separated by ages. And I remember seeing these boys, about 15 to 20 maybe boys in the corner, maybe third grade. And I remember looking at them, I was like, oh, it's like, wow. And I started comparing my life. I'm like, they're never going to have a dad, probably, like a relationship with their real dad. And I was like, oh man, they're never going to have those family trips or vacations, or they're not going to really have that bonding like siblings have, even though they may see these kids for a few years. And I just started thinking about all this, like, wow, they ever even play on a sports team? Like, what does their future look like? What are they going to do for work? I just started just going on it, all I was doing was piling on sadness, right? Just piling it on. But then I remember like 2 minutes maybe into it, I was like, what am I doing? Stop, slam the brakes. And I was like, okay, I need to stop in that direction. And I need to focus on where I'm at, what I'm doing. I need to be here for them.
Yep.
I need to be here for these kids, right? And then this amazing girl that I worked with, woman, said to me one time, about not comparing your life, because you're also comparing their life to your life, but you need to compare their current life to their previous life. They were living in hell. To them, this is like Disneyland.
It's all relative, yeah.
Right. Like, they were saved. They were freaking rescued.
Wow. Yeah.
They're living they got all their meals. They got people who care for them, people who they feel loved by, feel loved. Not told that they're loved. They freaking feel it. Because there's people who are amazing in this world. There's so much light that want to be part of this darkness and make dark turn back to light. And there are amazing people who volunteer, who go into these homes, who sacrifice their lives, work to go out to help with the healing journey of these kids. Amazing angels, saints, I don't care what you call them, but they're out there on the backside of this, loving these kids where they're at, right? And they know that somebody actually cares for them, cares for them. And that was so important to me to see that, like, wow, where they were, where they are now. And what was cool on that same trip, I think it was intentional or maybe not, they put us in all these situations. One, this is what it looks like when it's happening. Horrific. This is what I just explained to you, what it looks like when they're healing out of that. And then we got to meet these young women who have been years out, got their life on track. One of them had a child of their own, having their own job, being a hairstylist or whatever they're doing. And as soon as they come on the corner and see the team, they just freaking light up and hug them. One of the craziest, coolest experiences of my life was seeing the rescued meet the rescuer after like 2 years.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
There's a relationship between a mom and a child and between a husband and a wife, but I never could explain to you the relationship between the rescued and the rescuer.
I just got
reunited.
chills, yeah.
It's just so seeing those stages of here's what it looks like as it's happening to children. Here's what it looks like when they've been taken out and they're on their healing journey. Here's what it looks like when it's been a success was so valuable for me, because I know no matter where I meet a child at, that's not where it ends.
Yep.
That's not their story, right? They get to progress and move through And all it does from there is get better.
Yeah,
right?
you get to be a part of the solution and the rebirth. And I know for me, that's something I really struggle with too, is like I want to help everybody. And I do sort of like take on their pain. And it's like, well, I can handle that. I can handle this responsibility. And in your line of work, like, I don't even, it would be so hard. It's like, that would be like me going to the pet store and having to walk away from all these dogs. Like I'm like a hoarder of dogs. I have 3 dogs, right? I cannot even imagine at the scale that you know, experience this at, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
But see, I don't focus on the dark.
Yeah.
I focus on the light.
Yeah.
So that's why the name is the innocent.
Yeah.
He's not the criminal.
Yeah.
You know, I think for me, if I just focused on these pedophiles, which we do, don't get me wrong, it's not like we don't focus on them, the pedophiles and these predators and these traffickers. But our goal is the freaking not only prevent the innocence, but like how do we get these people out?
Yeah.
You know, of this situation and like this. It goes back to like comic book stories or Hollywood movies. Like it's this story that's redemptive.
Yeah.
You know, it's like there's this ending at the end of their life or their story that's so awesome. And subconsciously, I haven't put a lot of thought on this, but it's probably like, I don't know, for some reason, maybe there's like, you actually can see you're making a difference.
Yes.
You know, like it's not just day to day, like, oh, I put a screw into a part, pass it on. I put the same screw into the same part, pass it on. Like you just repetitively doing this, you're making a real impact.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I was going to ask you, like, you have a very childlike energy. Like you're just so approachable and just a really great spirit. Have you always been this way, or did you feel like you have?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Well, and children, like, it's so funny. I didn't know if I was gonna work with children. I knew I'd do like some kind of nonprofit work in 2004, which is a whole nother story. I knew that, and I started buying domains and starting nonprofits of my own. But I've always been drawn to children, no matter what country I was in, no matter what. I was the children guy. I would be spending hundreds of dollars to ship stuff out to give to kids. They've had such profound impact on my life. Some of my most impactful stories in my life are from what children did to me in foreign countries. Like,
yep.
And I remember when I started getting nieces and nephews and stuff like that, and I didn't even know it for years until my brother made it obvious to me. And I'd be down on the ground. I'd be like, I'm a cow. I'd be doing all this stuff like, I still do today with my kids. Oh my gosh, it's so funny what we do. And I'm just being completely stupid.
Yeah.
Right. And I remember after 5 or 6, maybe even more years, my brother just looks at me and he says, dude, when are you ever going to grow up? And I was like, what do you mean?
Yeah.
He's like, nobody else is being a cow right now. And I was like, oh, that's true. But that's just normal to me to be a cow with my kids, make them laugh. I don't know what it is. I have no idea. But I've always just been this, I don't know. I have no idea.
It's just so refreshing when you can, like, you don't have anything, like a child doesn't pass judgment in the same way an adult does because they're not corrupted by like societal norms and stuff yet. I feel like the younger the kid, the more silly I am. Yeah. But I think also what it is for me, it's like that unconditional love. They like my niece, for example, it's like she's not old enough to know what conditional love is. So she just loves unconditionally. And that's the best part.
Wow.
I think that's the best part about kids, especially the kids you're helping, is like, you know, we go back to like, it's all relative and they're so grateful. And to experience that gratitude, right, I'm sure is a feeling that nothing else can compare to it. When you rescue a child from that, I mean, you're giving them a chance. And all they needed is somebody to give them a chance, right? And you get to be that person. Okay, this is the final question that I'm going to ask all my guests. And it's something that I'm like, okay, do we have this programming? Are we built different? Is it like in our DNA or is it learned? You know, I think that we all have a certain programming that's unique to us, that's embedded in our DNA, but it's our responsibility to leverage it for good. But I also believe, like, to take that a step further, there are many of us that are just built different. And we just know within us, like from the day we're born or at an early age, ever since we can remember, that we were meant for more. And what is your belief around that? Do you think that this is something we're born with, or do you think that this "it had to be me" mindset and grit is learned?
I think some aspects are learned.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like the behavior of the household that I grew up in made me I can accomplish anything that I put my mind to, and I can do it perfectly, whatever that means, perfectly, right? But that was ingrained into me in a sense, and my siblings, to where like, if you see it and want it, you can get it, right? It just takes hard work. It takes a lot of things. And specific example, I grew up on an apple orchard, and I remember specifically, I saw this. It was called Shucks back then, an auto parts store. And I saw this bike. I was like, it's like $99, which was a lot of money back then. It's like, oh my gosh, Dad, I want that bike. He's like, great, come out and work for me. I'll pay you $2.50 an hour, and eventually you'll be able to buy that. I was like, what? Kind of like, actually, I did this morning with my kids. That's a stupid idea. That's what my son said. I probably said the same thing. I was fortunate enough that my dad had that ability to where I would go out and do these bottom of the totem pole jobs, the worst jobs, because everybody else is actually getting paid, and this is what they do. I did the worst jobs, right? And I hated it, but I remember doing it. I put in like 40 hours probably, or whatever it was. And at the end of the week, I got like $100. And I went and got that bike, and I was like, that's all it took?
Yep. That's
all it took? I mean, I could really, and that's how I was raised. So like, I didn't, yeah, sure, at Christmas you get gifts and you know that, but for the most, there was things like you worked for them, and you could get anything that your mindset. I think that was part of it. Now, I also believe that there's probably certain things that are placed upon you in your life that you have to decide if that's what that's now it's your choice. You have to do the other half,
like free will.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Like, it's now up to you to meet the other half. And part of that, I think, is around gifts. Like, we all have a certain gift.
Yes.
Right. And identifying what your gift is and putting that into work. Right. And so I think it's a little bit of both. Now, just because I think I was born with certain gifts. And so there's that component, and then there's the ones that I think my parents. But I do think you said something in the question. I think that I do believe that anyone can do it. Like, I don't think there's people out there listening that are like, well, I wasn't born that way. I'm not one of those. That's bull. Like, it literally, there's a lot of integrity pieces. There's dedication, determination. There's all those things that you have to show up with and align. And you have to find that inside of you grit to just do it. Because most of the things we don't want to do. People who have drive and have success and stuff like that, they don't do things because they want to. They do it because they have to, for the most part, a lot of it, right? Like, I have to do this. Some of the things come because they want to. But even when you turn your hobby into a job, your job now becomes a job.
Yep.
It is not a hobby anymore. It is different. And so even though there's parts of what I love to do, there's a lot of components of running a nonprofit that you don't love.
Yeah.
But you have to do it, and you do them. And if we're getting into this society where people are like, well, I'm not going to do that because I don't want to. Oh, man, we're going down the wrong path. Because most of the things that you're going to have to do, I don't want to work out. I don't want to eat super healthy. I want to eat junk food all the time. I don't want to do this. I don't want to put my phone away. I don't want to get off social media. I don't want to do this. Great. I know that. I know you don't want to.
Right.
That's great. But now you have a choice to or not to.
Yeah.
Right. And then you have to have the strength and the willpower to go in and just say, I'm going to do it. And then you, just like anyone else, I don't think anybody's built with a stronger willpower. I think it's a muscle that you work with. And when you start taking little pieces, like, people think like, well, I need to lose 100 pounds. No, just lose 2.
Yep.
Right. Once you see out that you can lose 2 pounds, you're like, dang, I can do it.
I can do 2 more. Yeah.
I can do 3 more. Now I lost 5. And then you look back like, dang, I lost 10 pounds. Right. I'm going to lose 100 pounds. It's just going to take me 9 months.
Yep.
I'm not going to do it in 2 days.
Yeah.
In those small little bites, then you start seeing like, man, I really can do it. Not only can I get the bike that I wanted in the store, I can almost get anything. And I deal with people that don't see like how do you have that vision? I'm like, I don't know now. At this point, I don't even know how I do it. It's just, when people told me, I'm going to film school, I'm moving to Hollywood, I'm going to go to Hollywood, about 10,000 people said, good luck.
Yep.
And I was like, well, yeah, with that attitude, but in my mind, there's only one option. That's success and winning.
Yep.
Right. Like,
you'll figure it out.
Yeah. I'm going to fail 6,000 times, but you know what? I learned 6,000 things.
Yep.
When I failed 6,000 times. And I think that that's part of it. One, maybe people are afraid to fail. And maybe because the consequences are huge.
Yep.
We fail, but we learn. Even when it's a predator and you might have got super close on this chat and this and that, and then something goes wrong, and they, even if it's not your fault, and they take a different turn, and you go like, damn it, he didn't show up, he didn't arrest him, and you feel like heavy weight, like, oh, failed on that one. But also you sit back and debrief the situation, and you go, what did we learn?
Mm-hmm.
What did we learn in this situation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we pushed too hard. We might have pushed too hard.
Yep.
Because I'm not going to say it. I'll say it off the air, but there's like one thing you can do, and horny dudes will just come running right back.
Yep.
It's like, maybe you're pushing too hard.
Yeah. I love
like
that
playing
perspective.
hard to get
Yep.
thing and all that. So yeah, I don't
Yeah,
know.
when there's that tipping point where it's just too much work, right? And then they're like, oh, not worth it. And you might tip them off in another way, right? Like this is a little sus.
Yeah.
But I love your perspective there, because it got me thinking about like energy cannot be created or destroyed. Like it's all in there. It's just a matter of your, shrunk or hole in your being. And I think that is the difference. Like it's funny, you've kind of changed my perspective already just based on your testimony, because you look at, for example, let's say I feel like I'm a natural born salesperson. I could have easily taken that and sold drugs on the street, right? I just decided to go sell medical devices instead, right? So this programming is, we all have it within us, and it's at our own free will that we choose to use it for good or bad, right? And so I think you're right. A lot of it is like a muscle that we exercise, and it is developed, and it's based on our free will choice, right? So this has been an amazing episode. I hope you feel the same. I was really, really excited about this conversation, and it actually just, it went in so many different directions that I could have never predicted, but it turned out as good as it could have possibly come out. If I hope you agree.
Yes.
So yeah,
I loved it.
Thank you so much for everything.
Absolutely.
I'm really excited to support you, be here for it all, and just watch you kick ass in our community and others across the country.
Oh,
all right.
you.
High five.